Hi, I'm Brian Ricks with Burke Ricks Communications. For many years, our firm produced the annual Southern California Energy Summit here in Palm Springs. And I am happy to lead today's conversation about renewable energy in this webisode of Hot Purple Energy series called The Desert We Want, in partnership with Palm Springs Life magazine. In this installment, we will discuss renewable energy with three important players in the local conversation. First, Geoff Kors of the nonprofit organization Desert Community Energy will discuss the energy program recently launched in the city of Palm Springs. Next, Nate Otto of Hot Purple Energy will talk about solar energy in the Coachella Valley. And finally, Mikael Jakobsson of Cierco will discuss California's first offshore wind project. Together, we hope to shed light on how we can work together to build a sustainable future through advances in renewable energy to build the desert we want. Hello, Geoff, Nate, and Mikael.
Hello.
Our first guest is Geoff Kors, former mayor of Palm Springs. He's the current member of the Palm Springs City Council and chair of Desert Community Energy. Good morning, Geoff.
Good morning, Brian.
Before we get started on Desert Community Energy, let's just talk a little bit in general about what the challenges are that face renewables here in the desert, just as in general.
Sure, and there are so many great benefits in the desert for renewables, but I think one of the real challenges is storage. And the grid's not really designed for storage. So as we continue to work on those capacities, batteries, things so we can store solar and wind energy, that's going to have a huge impact long term. And Desert Community Energy, just briefly, has entered into, in our first year, a contract for a solar project with storage. So we're really excited about that. And we're going to continue to do that because by being able to store the energy and not have to put it out in the grid, so we have it as backup and be able to produce more is going to really be a change for the renewable energy in our valley.
So what generally in the desert makes this a particularly great place for renewables?
360 days of sunshine a year really helps with solar. We're one of the best places in the country, if not the world, for wind energy, the way we're located, and of course, the potential for geothermal and the Salton Sea. So we're really uniquely situated to be at the forefront of renewable energy in this area.
So let's talk a little bit about DCE. As you know, last August, the city of Palm Springs moved forward with a community choice aggregation program called Desert Community Energy. Tell us a little bit about that program and how the program works and what the city hopes to achieve with Desert Community Energy.
Sure, and so Desert Community Energy is a community choice aggregation program, which is authorized under California legislation, and they've existed in other parts of the state for quite some time. And we launched actually April of last year, and in Palm Springs. No other city has launched yet. And what it is the corporate utility still maintains the lines, delivers the power, runs the bills, which is a little over half of the bill. But Desert Community Energy procures the electricity. And so we're that part of the bill. And there's a whole bunch of reasons to do a program like this. First, there's no corporate profits. So every dollar that goes into it goes back out to the community. And just one example, last summer, due to COVID and people struggling with their rates, we were able to use some of the reserves we had built to keep rates artificially low to help customers. So that's one real benefit. And the way the program works under state law is everyone is enrolled in it automatically. People have the right to opt into different programs. We did polling. The majority in Palm Springs wanted 100% carbon-free power and were willing to pay 10% more for it. So we chose that as our default option. And then we sent out numerous notices. We did some door-to-door and phone to let people know they could either opt down to Desert Community Saver, which is a 50% carbon-free program, and the least expensive electricity anyone in Palm Springs can buy, unless they're smart and do their own solar, because that's the least expensive energy one can have, and that's what I do at my house. But I supplement when I don't have it with Desert Community Energy 100% carbon-free. And people can also opt out and stay with Southern California Edison. But just in our first year alone, we've had the equivalent of taking 20,000 cars off the road through Desert Community Energy. And for people in the Desert Saver plan, they've saved over $200,000. And that's the benefit. It's all about supporting the community, environmental benefit, as well as dollar benefit for those who need. The other piece of it is all the discount programs that the state provides, federal provides, all apply here. So over 20% of our customers in Palm Springs are on discount programs. And we did outreach. We were able to do outreach that utilities hadn't done before to get more people enrolled. So we have over 7,000 households in Palm Springs on these discount programs.
What has been your role with Desert Community Energy?
I was involved early on. I was on CVAG, the Coachella Valley Association of Governments, environmental and energy group that first started talking about this. And when DCE was created, I was the liaison from the city of Palm Springs, and I've been a member of the board. There are 3 cities who are on the board, and I've chaired it for the last year, and I'm currently the chair of that. And we do monthly meetings. We have an advisory committee made up of residents from all 3 cities, 15 people, 5 from Palm Springs. It's very active to make sure we're doing outreach to the community and getting input from our residents on this program, how it's working, how the notices are going, ideas. They help vet projects that we've entered into and contracts for renewable energy. So it's really been a great partnership between the governments and our residents in the community advisory committees.
So this program does reach residents, and it also reaches businesses, and it also has a solar program, correct?
Yeah, so we do the same net meter energy that you would get from a regular utility for people over their home solar, and it is businesses and residents, and it's great. Over 80% of the customers in Palm Springs have stayed in with 100% carbon-free power. And that's having a huge impact on the environment just in the first year here.
You talked about local control a little while ago. Let's maybe elaborate a little bit on the benefits of that, including that power purchase agreement that was recently entered into.
The real benefit of local control is, one, obviously, no money is going to corporations, so it stays here. And one of the benefits of that is, as we build up reserves, as other projects like this that have been around longer do, we invest that money right back into the community, into our ratepayers. So we can, help subsidize the cost of solar on commercial buildings. So our businesses, especially our retail and restaurants, that really struggle in the summer to stay open with the huge utility bills, we can help with that. We can help do insulation. We've done some solar projects already. And so recently, we also entered into a number of contracts. So I mentioned the solar one earlier, where we're doing our own solar project. But we also entered into 3 contracts for wind energy on wind farms right in Palm Springs. So many people come here and they think all the windmills provide energy for Palm Springs and the Coachella Valley. And it hasn't been that way before. But now we've entered into contracts for 3 windmills right here in Palm Springs. And the result of that is we're creating 150 good paying construction jobs, and probably 6 or 7 long-term good paying jobs to run the windmills. And we're benefiting from that. And it's estimated over 20 years, those projects and the solar project will save our customers, our ratepayers, between $13 and $50 million. And so by planning ahead, by doing these longer term contracts, we have the ability to do that right here in our own city and in the Valley and save our ratepayers money. Plus, we get to do all the benefits as we build up reserves and we're around for a couple of years to help people whether it's to pay for solar, to do insulation, all those kind of programs that we couldn't do unless we had a program like this here.
So you're obviously pretty bullish about the future of renewable energy here in the Coachella Valley.
I am. I mean, I'm excited about it. If we look just at our first year, and we just got data, Palm Springs, we were going to be above our 2010 levels of carbon emissions, and the goal, of course, was to be at our 1990 levels. And because of DCE, we're going to hit those levels this year. So we just got the draft of the report from the outside agency that's doing this, and we're going to definitely meet a major reduction in renewables over the last decade that would have been higher if it was not for our residents and businesses doing 100% carbon free. And that's an amazing achievement in just 1 year to have that kind of impact. The amount of greenhouse gas emissions that we have stopped in Palm Springs because of this program. And as the state has a goal to get down to 1990 levels, it's great that we as a city are there, because it shows that if we all do our part, we actually can have a real impact on climate change and helping our environment. And that's why we hope to see these programs expand, not just in California, but around the country. We all really need to step up if we're going to make our planet habitable for the next generations to come.
Well said. Thank you so much, Geoff, for being with us today.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Really appreciate it. Thanks.
Next guest is Nate Otto, President and CEO of Hot Purple Energy. Nate, Hot Purple Energy is a household name here in the Coachella Valley. Tell us about the business, who you are, what you do, what you've been able to distinguish, how you've been able to distinguish the company in the solar energy marketplace.
Well, thanks for having me. Hot Purple Energy, we're local residents. We're a group of like-minded, hardworking, just residents that made it their mission to offer the valley the very best energy solutions. It ranges from solar to batteries to the management of that power. I believe what's really distinguished HPE has been being years ahead of the competition. We always knew it was about energy and not just solar. That's why it's never been Hot Purple Solar. It's always been Hot Purple Energy. And we're seeing that now as batteries have really come into their own. A lot of the manufacturers are really pushing it now, and we're happy that we're on the forefront of that.
So what are the main challenges that renewables, wind, solar, geothermal, face in the marketplace?
Well, it's funny how that all works. There's utilities that seem to have a love-hate relationship with us, where they know that we help the distributed grid and keep bad things from happening, like what happened in Texas when you have a distributed grid. And then you also have the politics, which seem to say one thing and then do another. Right now, we have AB 1139 in Sacramento, which is really a rooftop killer. I mean, it is not very good for people that want to put on rooftop solar, and really backs the utility scale solar projects that plow up the desert, which just sort of goes against the whole environmental thing, the whole environmental aspect of solar, when you're just going over and just plowing up native desert. And there's other challenges besides that. The challenges of the technology moving faster than the building departments, faster than the building code. So you find yourself educating the building departments, and hopefully you have that relationship where you can then go in and have that talk with them. With COVID, though, the building departments have been locked down pretty tightly, so that's been very, very challenging. And it's actually the technology's been moving at a more blistering pace, where it's we have changes in our market with the technology, with the utility agreements, with the legislation, with the taxes. Between all those, our market changes, or our demands, or how we work changes 3 to 4 times a year. It's a little hard to keep up with, to say the least, on top of the normal challenges of running a business.
So tell me about a little more about AB 1189. How does that work, and how does that affect your business?
Well, AB 1139 is they want to up the monthly cost for anybody that goes solar. Right now, you have non-bypassable charges of about $30 a month that basically go to the utility company for maintaining the grid. To me, it makes sense. You're connected to the grid, and if you're not buying any power from them, you should be paying in to help maintain it, because it's great to have the grid there on very hot days when there's a lot of clouds and you don't have enough solar and maybe not enough storage. But this almost triples those fees. And then it also makes that the power that you put back onto the grid, you're only getting the lowest wholesale prices. So we're talking 3 to 4 cents a watt is all you're going to get when you feed the grid back. Another thing that's really bad about the bill is that it ends the grandfathering. So anybody that got solar, say 2 years ago, on a lease or a PPA where they're buying that power at, say, 16 cents a watt, now all of a sudden, those financial metrics that they bought that solar on, that they signed a 20-year deal with, are going to be negative. Some of them are just saving, $50 a month, and $50 a month doesn't sound like a lot, but for, somebody on a very tight budget, $50 a month is a very big deal. And now with the 1139, if it went through and it passes our state legislature and the governor signs it in, they could go negative $50 a month. So you have somebody that signed a PPA or a lease deal or maybe a loan for 20 years that now is going to see a negative effect by trying to do the right thing and save a little bit of money for their family.
So tell us about NEM 3, Net Energy Metering 3.
So the net energy metering agreements that the utilities have with the individual solar customers, these are individual homes, is now on its third incarnation. So it's about to roll out at the beginning of 2022, and the specifics aren't quite figured out yet. The PUC is still working on those. And this one is particularly a little harsh. They just keep narrowing the window on the agreement. It used to be that we had to get paid for the power at the same price that you bought the power from. And NEM 3 is changing that dynamic as well, or trying to change that dynamic, where you would only get half the credit for the power when you feed back into the grid. Now, both 1139, AB 1139, and NEM 3 are not done. They're not a done deal. So if anybody's concerned, they can write their assemblyman, their senator, they can write the PUC, and they can certainly write the governor and say that, they would like to see the agreements that we have, because it's really worked well. I mean, California is the biggest adopter to rooftop solar. We have the most distributed grid, and it's been working really, really well. Is it going to be the answer? No, we still need other solutions. We still need the wind. We still need large scale solar, commercial solar. I'd like to see it put on the rooftops of these large warehouses and such, but we still need that. And we still need to be looking at geothermal. We still need to be looking at hydrogen. All those, it's all the above. And we still have special interests contributing to our legislatures into their campaign funds to get a sweetheart deal. We still have lobbyists that are very one-sided. It's a real drag that this is working against us, when the heart and people's will is let's go after it all. Let's be renewable, and let people take charge of their own electricity and save money doing it.
So these bills would impact people who have already signed up and had solar, as well as potential customers, correct?
NEM 3 is not retroactive. 1139, AB 1139 is, and that's really what is just painful about it, is it takes out the goodwill that everybody's been doing as they move on to renewables.
Do these also impact wind and geothermal, or is it just solar?
Most of that is, I mean, from my side, it's the rooftop solar that it impacts. But obviously, the impacts are on the larger scale, the wind and the geothermal as well.
So what makes the desert a viable place for companies in the sustainability and renewable energy spaces?
Well, it's the trifecta. We have abundant renewable resources, plenty of sun, plenty of wind. We have a high demand, and we have a willing workforce. But I would say the other little X factor is that here in the Coachella Valley, it's the Valley residents, whether they're conservative or liberal, they see the value in protecting our environment and saving some money at the same time.
So I remember when you first started the business, and we all worked together on the energy summits and other things. How has solar evolved over the years? How has it changed?
Well, the technologies have really not moved as much as people might think. The only difference I'd say with the panels, they've gotten slightly more efficient, which is basically how much power they put out per square foot. What's changed in the solar space has been the amount of viable, strong companies that have put out a good product for our harsh environment. But what's really changed in the space has been the energy storage and the management of that power. That's really gone leaps and bounds. I think that what Tesla did and Elon Musk sort of, selling a product he didn't have 3-4 years ago, it forced the issue with everybody. And so now we're seeing a lot of really great products come out. This year was a banner year for storage being installed in homes here in the Coachella Valley. And next year is on track to probably triple that, maybe even quadruple that.
Yeah, so battery storage, I think, is the topic that everybody's talking about right now. On both the rooftop solar and on large-scale projects, it's the topic du jour, if you will. So you think that's going to have a big impact on your business?
Absolutely, and I think that as the utilities make the agreements less favorable for solar rooftop, you're going to see more and more people go to storage. And now the energy management systems are being produced to even handle a small little generator to sort of be a hybrid, like a car, where you just keep those batteries charged up if you start using too much.
So last year, I think there was $1 billion solar project approved in Riverside County. How do you think that's going to impact our region?
Well, it certainly helps out people that don't have a viable roof for solar. I mean, the truth is we have to tell people every single day that their roof really isn't inclusive, isn't proper for solar. It just isn't going to produce that much. Or you have apartments that don't get solar. So, there is a space for larger scale solar projects to help that out. With the new community solar or community power, it's really good that we have that large scale solar. My only concern is I'd like to see it put on pre-disturbed land, closer to the source, closer to the need, and done in a thoughtful way with our environment. Otherwise, we're sort of going backwards when we're just willing to plow up desert in the name of the environment. It's an oxymoron. It just doesn't make sense to me, especially when we have so many large warehouses for the logistical buildings that we're building. and they're all empty. I mean, you fly over them and you look at just fields and fields of millions of square feet of rooftop, that if we had different agreements with the utilities, we would be able to use those, and that would be our aggregate solar for those that don't have a viable roof.
So is that community solar? Is that what's referred to as community solar?
Yes, that's a little bit more like the community solar rather than the utility scale plowing up the desert.
What should consumers look for when they're looking to acquire a solar system?
Well, I think that they should really be looking at what their energy needs are, not only today, but what they're going to be for tomorrow. If they have inefficient ACs that are 20 years old, and maybe some teenagers that are going to be moving out, their needs are actually going to be reduced. And they can actually have a little bit smaller of a system because they need to fix that AC. They might really need some insulation in the attic. And then likewise, if they're going to be adding a couple of electric cars, they should be looking at that. So I usually tell people to look at the 5 to 10 year plan for their energy needs, and and base their solar system on that.
Does your firm do an energy audit for a potential client?
Well, they should. I don't know that you need a formal energy audit, but you definitely need to have that conversation and be looking around. It's one of the things that we always do. And if a solar company isn't asking questions, isn't looking around and making comments about where the energy is going and how you're using the energy, then they might not be the right company for you.
And there's lots of different options in terms of purchasing, financing, leasing. There's a lot of options now that there didn't used to be, right?
There are a lot of options. Typically, it's a very simple breakdown, though. If you have a tax appetite, then take the tax credit and get a loan if you want to zero down. If you don't have a tax appetite, then look at the lease. The lease is the most expensive way to go solar. So that's really your last option. It's the easiest, but it's also the most expensive.
So Nate, we framed this series as the desert we want. Why don't you talk about that in terms of your business and solar energy? Well,
honestly, I think that we're well on our way to the desert we want. We have a community-minded focus here with, both the cities and the people really, pushing towards renewables with all the different sources that we have. Not only with the solar and the wind, but, we have some hydrogen companies looking at our desert to actually produce the hydrogen here, which is really, really awesome. And that helps. That actually is a form of storage to a degree when they're producing hydrogen with renewables, and then they could then use that to generate power plants. So it isn't all batteries. There's other ways, other forms of storage. But I think that, with the city's involvement, CBEP, CBAG, it's just part of our DNA and where we're going. And I also want to point out that the schools are part of this too. The schools have career programs. One of them is the REAL program over there in Desert Hot Springs. And they're doing a really good job of helping these kids look at a path for a career in renewables. I really don't know how many have gone through our doors, but we certainly have had a lot of them. And it just shows that the community is really focused on this, and it's a wonderful thing.
So Nate, tell us how battery storage actually works.
Well, the battery storage, how it works in both residential and commercial when it's married up to solar, is that typically when the solar is overproducing power for the needs of that building, it's filling up the batteries. And then, in the early evening, when the power needs are a lot and we don't have as much solar pushing into the building, then the battery is going to discharge and take on that peak demand to take the burden off of the utilities.
Great. That was great, Nate. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Our next guest is Mikael Jakobsson, President and CEO of Cierco Incorporated. Mikael, tell us a little bit about Cierco.
Hi, thank you for having me. Cierco is a company that actually rooted itself 30 years ago when I came to California, looking to take a job, or was offered a job to run some wind farms. And 10 years later, we formed Cierco, a U.S. company. We're working with mainly offshore wind, and we're working both in the European space, but also now in the U.S. space. So as you know, over the last 20 years, the offshore wind has been expanding quite a lot in the European area, and now it's coming to U.S. on the East Coast and also here on the West Coast. But we are focusing mainly on big floating wind turbines because of the outer continental shelf. The water gets very deep, so yeah, that's Cierco working on both sides of the pond, so to speak.
Do you still have links here in the desert to Palm Springs and the Coachella Valley?
Absolutely. Ever since I came here back in 1991, it's been my main home. And there's something about the desert, there's something about Palm Springs that as much as you try to go away, you can't. So we're still rooted in Palm Springs.
So tell us what your main challenges are in the wind industry.
So what we are working with is more the industrial part of larger scale energy plants and wind power plants in floating wind space. And as you know, there is transitioning going on in so many places. We have the environmental portion of it, we have climate change, we have a consciousness when we see the Senate Bill 100, SB 100, that is going to take California to 100% renewable energy content by 2045. That's a huge step. At the same time, we're transitioning the way we live and the way we are driving our cars. We have electrical cars, and we are shifting away from the fossil fuels. And I think what you see is an energy society that is also transforming as these impacts are driving us. And it impacts us to go towards solar, we go towards wind, we go towards geothermal. And the challenges here, I think, has been mentioned a little bit by both Geoff and with Nate. I think it's the adoption of renewable energy into an already existing machinery of how we deal with energy, how we produce it, and how we manage it. Today, everybody knows that we're paying between 16 and maybe even up to 48 cents a kilowatt hour, depending on the time of day. And when we're looking at these renewable energy sources, it costs between 3 to 5 or 7 cents to produce a kilowatt hour. So we can see that there is a huge space, which is one of these transitional challenges, which I think Europe saw about 15 years ago. And that means that we're working on many platforms to make this work. And for us with offshore wind, I think the key is to get started and to find a pathway so that it can be implemented in time and in the way that we can accept it and let it be a part of our community.
So what would you say your major challenge was, your biggest challenge?
It's the integration, I think. It's new. First of all, what I do is, and my teams, we're working with big, huge floating wind turbines, and that's new. Nobody on the West Coast knows so much about offshore wind, so we need to do it in a very careful way. But I think it is this integration where we have a certain way of how we have dealt with the way we produce power and having fixed power or firm power, and how to make the renewable power a firm power as well and provide for the needs. And Geoff mentioned it very well, the battery storage, but also the whole technology space is bubbling right now with hydrogen, liquid ammonia, and fuels that can come into play a vital role in how we actually transcend into this renewable space where 100% of energy could end up being renewable energy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a challenge. Like geothermal, for example, the production of it is very expensive. How is the floating wind turbine differ in terms of how is it cost effective by comparison to some of the other forms of renewable energy?
So what we have seen over time is, and that's a good example with solar, we saw it, double digits or over 10 cents a kilowatt hour and coming down to much lower costs over time, the industrial. And the offshore wind did the same. And over the last 5 years, it took a real big dip where cost of capital brought that down to a very lower level of cost, which meant that, like on the East Coast with NYSERDA having the ability to take on power purchase agreements that are competitive, and these community, the community or desert community energy is one of those mechanisms that are actually opening the door for this. And I think this is the huge opportunities where we can come to integrate this in a smart way. But there's a lot of work to actually make this happen and the way we go about it.
Yeah, there are community choice aggregation programs all over the state, so they would be a ready market for your product.
Yeah, and so we are, although we're working on the coast side with these larger devices, the community choice aggregation groupings that are out there, there's many of them, and they're expanding quickly. And that is one of those, let's say, the PPA off-takers that have the ability to have sort of, let's say, a shorter gap between the generation and the community, and where maybe we over time have, in the conventional system, the way we manage the power, have built up costs and structure such that, yeah, it's become a little bit costly how we actually manage the power. But it is a serious problem. And I think one of the situations in Texas here earlier this year last year showed how challenging that can be. And unless we work as an overall community, both not only local, but also regional and national.
So the way you see how do you see these technologies impacting the desert? Obviously, we don't have a lot of ocean here, so.
No, indeed. No, but there's actually a lot of parallels. And Nate mentioned local fabrication, manufacturing, good paying jobs, new jobs. And I think this, when we look at the offshore wind and the new amount of power coming into the system, that is a renewable power. And as we said before, it produces when it produces. And if we have a non-windy day, we don't have power and we need to have storage. And that is one of the mechanisms that we have to deal with in the larger scale. So we're talking about smart energy systems. And this is regionally, nationally, it's also locally. So for instance, these systems of hydrogen, using hydrogen for fuel, using liquid ammonia for fuel, battery storage strategies, and looking at the architecture of our community. And this is what makes Palm Springs so fantastic and interesting, is that we uniquely have these sort of basic ingredients to make that happen. So all these things that we're doing with hydrogen and the battery systems and the storage and the strategies in the larger scale are directly implementable in this, let's say, more regional or local scale, and could really have fantastic effects if we can define that architecture. So
we frame this series as the desert we want. So the desert we want, in your view, is?
Yeah, no. Ever since I came to the desert, and we should be aware, Palm Springs has been an icon and a milestone in the wind development, in the history of wind in general. This was the Mecca, and this is where turbines came very early, and so did I. And I think that heritage and that is something to build on, where both solar, wind, and geothermal, as we mentioned, all these ingredients could end up being a place, the Coachella Valley could be a place where we could integrate these systems, where we could have a self-sustainable strategy, where we bring this together through this desert community energy. And I think this is a great opportunity, and I would love to see that happen sooner than later.
So how is Cierco focusing to create a winnable game here?
This is very interesting, and that's a good question. I've been fortunate to have been around for the very first wind turbine that went in offshore back in 1989, and we've been through various steps of evolution and see what works and what doesn't. Now, when we're looking at the California coast and we're looking at the introduction of offshore wind on the coast, it is extremely important that you pave a robust way in your permitting, that you look and gather facts in the early phases before you do the big build-outs, that we make use of these first, let's say, test and demonstration projects to maximize those values and the planning going forward. Now, we know that working with a new energy source, which comes into a new environment, we have to look at the broader perspective and employment and local industry. It comes down to one of the fundamentals of why we do certain things and when we look at new energy sources. It's very easy to import from either East or from the West, from Europe. But the strategy here, I think, from Cierco's game is to see if we can anchor this locally, that we can create California jobs, opportunities for local ports, and start already from the very beginning and sort of building that up step by step, because developing or deploying, let's say, gigawatts of power in a market where those industries haven't had a chance to even look at it, haven't had a chance to even build a single device, where some other companies and industries around the rest of the world has. And I think that is where we are focusing, working with the trade unions, trying to create these pathways so we can build these, at least explore to what extent we can build these locally, and create also transitioning of workforces from areas, for instance, of decommissioned nuclear. Good workforces of engineers, they need to go somewhere. We have oil and gas platforms that are decommissioning off the coast. And these are all workforces that could come to work very effectively in this new industry. And I think when you can counterweight the cost of power with the value of what goes back into the economy of social economic benefits, I think that is one of those key things and key mechanisms that we have to look at for where the value proposition actually can be quite high. And that for us is one of the fundamentals to a winning game, so to speak.
Great. Thank you so much for joining us today. I know you're joining us from Vienna, and we appreciate you tuning in for us. Thank you again.
Oh, it's definitely my pleasure, and I'm glad to have been part of this event. Thank you.
On behalf of Palm Springs Life, I'd like to thank all of our panelists for participating in this critical conversation about the desert we want. It's been a pleasure. Have a great afternoon.